Good evening, everybody. This is the Amherst Conservation Commission meeting. Today is the 26th of February 2025. I'll be chairing today. Our regular chair is out for the day. Let's see, we're going to have somebody, Martin Feehan, a wildlife biologist, a moose and deer biologist for the state, going to be talking about deer populations and hunting at 7:10. And otherwise, I think we got a few land use permits and 3 hearings to go with that. With that, I'll leave it to the director, Mr. Zomek.
Thanks, Andre. I'll be very brief. I know we've got a full agenda tonight, but really quickly, two announcements. One is that CPA projects will be coming before the council. The commission may recall that Aaron and our communications manager, Sam Giffen, made presentations to the commission about 2 proposals on the conservation side. One is for trails and bridge enhancement, and the other was for signage. And so those will, Jason, of course, was on the CPAC recommending those to the council, and they will be coming before the council in their next couple of meetings. This is part of the budget process. So I expect good things. I think they're solid projects, and my hope is they'll be funded. The other quick announcement is that Aaron and I will be presenting at the MACC conference on Saturday. We'll be doing a brief presentation with 2 other communities, Northampton and Stowe, Massachusetts. All 3 communities have engaged in purchasing former golf courses and proposing reuse of those golf courses. So I think Northampton is about 105-acre golf course. Ours is 150 acres, and then Stowe is pretty large. I think it's over 300 acres. So those 3 communities will be represented and presenting at the Mass Association of Conservation Commissions on Saturday. So should be interesting. We expect about 50 people in the audience, and we'll have a good Q&A. So those are my 2 quick announcements.
Great. Well, thank you, Dave. I have a question from Bruce. Bruce, go ahead.
Dave, speaking of golf courses, I drove by the clubhouse the other day.
Still there?
Yeah.
Yes, we have a contract with, we bid that out, and we have a contract with a demolition firm, and it's all just about scheduling. It's whether you're
Okay.
whether you're renovating your bathroom or waiting for a demo, it's all about getting in the queue. But it will be coming down anytime soon.
I want to watch, see, so I keep track.
Yeah. If I have any advance notice, I will try to put it out, but it's not going to take long for that old structure to come down.
All right. Next on the agenda is the Land Management Subcommittee update. That'll be Alex. How much of an update do you have there, Alex?
We have one item for a vote, and that's the land use applications. We took into consideration the comments and the vote the last time the commission met, and we went through, the subcommittee, Dave and Aaron went through, and we took out charging fees and changed other language that was connected with that. That's been in the subcommittee folder, so it's coming back to the commission now for a vote.
All right. And that vote, and you want to take that vote now?
Sure.
All right. Any questions from the public on the? I don't think the public has seen this, right? Is that correct?
No, the public has not seen it yet. We're gonna compile all the different sections and put them on a web page prior to our public hearing so that the public can see the drafts that are going to for review to the public hearing.
All right, well, with that, then we'll look for a motion then. If you folks have reviewed it, is there any comment from the rest of the commissioners? No. All right, so then I would propose a vote.
I move that we approve the land use applications rules as presented in the folder for the commission, which have taken into consideration commission comments on fees and the vote not to charge fees.
Oh, Bruce is muted, but I think he would.
Second.
Second, okay. So Alex with a motion, Bruce with a second. Bruce,
Aye.
Alex,
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
and I'm an aye. And I don't think I think Rachel was there briefly and disappeared again. All right, well, with that then, if we can bring in Mr. Feehan, Martin Feehan, deer and moose biologist with Mass Fish and Game, for his presentation. Hello, Martin. Welcome. Thank you so much for showing up and giving your expertise. Are you going to be presenting with visuals as well?
Yep. Yeah, I just sent the request.
Okay. Good to go? Yeah. All right.
There we go.
All right. All yours.
Thank you for inviting me tonight. So I'm going to talk a bit about kind of the state of deer management here in Massachusetts, how we go about that, and then really the importance of land access and management, like with conservation commissions and other land trust partners, etc., in addressing deer management across the state. Okay. So just to make sure we're all kind of starting here on the same page, I'm just going to go through some very basic white-tailed deer biology. Essentially, white-tailed deer are able to actually get pregnant when they're 6 months old. About 10% or so get pregnant that first fall, and then above 90% will be able to get pregnant beginning when they're 1.5 years old. Beginning with the second set of fawns, from that point forward, deer will actually average twins for the rest of their life here in the Northeast. And fawn survival then becomes really important because they can have essentially replacing themselves that very first birth cohort. And then after that point forward, it all essentially accounts for potential population growth. And fawn survival, kind of historically, with the full suite of natural predators that you'd have pre-European colonization, would have been right around the 15 to 20% fawn survival to 1 year, the recruitment rate, effectively. Whereas now what we see here across the Northeast is fawn survival in about 40 to 60% range in ex-urban areas, and then that can go well above that in urban areas where you have more of an urban shield effect, helping fawns survive even further. Home ranges vary quite a bit, from about 1/2 square mile to about 3 square miles for does. However, they can get much smaller in urban areas, sometimes as small as just a corner woodlot, if a doe has all the resources that she needs to be able to live out her life and be able to raise fawns. With all of that, there's the potential for exponential growth, and this is something that makes managing deer quite challenging. Particularly with the social changes we've seen here across the Northeast and the decline in hunters. Across Massachusetts, white-tailed deer are very abundant. They are habitat generalists that are able to really adapt to wherever they shall live, whether that be in the higher elevations with mature canopy across the Berkshires and Western Mass to the urban areas around each of our areas around Boston, Springfield, etc. in the east, and even to the islands where we have the highest densities with Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. Their diet is quite flexible. During the summer, they really spend a lot of times browsing on buds, leaves, and forbs. And essentially, they will eat anything within their vantage point, from the ground to the very tips of the branches that they can reach. In overabundant areas, you'll regularly see a browse line if you're driving around the streets. You'll see that in Amherst, where you'll see a clear browse line in much of the town. And that's from the deer actually eating everything within that range of their motion. During the winter, their diet changes over to woody browse with what's left. Historically, when there were severe winters where you'd have snowfall and snowpack that would limit access to food during the winter, there were historically winter die-offs. Nowadays, with such milder winters and without snowpack that lasts 3-4 months, we no longer really see any winter mortality. And so all of that has set up a situation where we have high fawn survival due to a lack of predators, and also then a loss of overwintering mortality. So it's really kind of a perfect storm, allowing for population growth even before we get into the dynamics of hunters, etc. Now, this becomes really important from a conservation perspective, and Mass Wildlife, fundamentally, when we are managing whitetail deer, we are looking at this from a conservation perspective. It is not about the actual recreation of hunting. It is really about trying to ensure that we have healthy ecosystems for the long term. And it's really critical to address overabundant deer because they have a major impact on ecosystems because of the fact that they are browsing everything within that range that they live. And there are many studies that go into this, the impacts across the country where you have overabundant deer. It leads to a loss of overall biodiversity, everything from plants, insects, birds, because of the fact you lose all those microhabitats within the forest canopy. And so it's a major part of managing deer is really trying to address that overabundance early, so that way you don't have those long-term impacts on the ecosystems. I'm going to go through a few examples here over the next few slides showing the differences that you have in the forest when you have differences in deer densities. So this is from one particular study that was actually really focused on the change with birds and the diversities within the forest. And in areas below 20 deer per square mile, you can see that on the photo on the left, where there's lots of diversity of habitat all within that understory through the mid canopy, all the way to the top of the canopy within that forest. And so each of those areas, from the shrubs and seedlings and the kind of middle mature trees, you have lots of different microhabitats within that. And so that then creates different habitat for all those different species. And so that's where that biodiversity really can thrive. Versus here on the right, where you have more than 150 deer per square mile, you essentially end up with a sterile understory. You don't have any of those habitats along the floor, and you don't really have the different age classes of trees coming up in the middle. Now, bringing this closer here to Massachusetts, we have some photos all from the same watershed around Wachusett. And so these are going to actually be from the same watershed, the only differences here being essentially whether they're open to hunting or not. So in this site, where there's about 10 to 20 deer per square mile, you can really see that diversity of habitats within this photo. You have lots of different age classes of saplings coming up that are only a couple years old. You have shrubbery along the forest floor, and lots of different age classes there within the trees. And so as you have mature trees that might fall, there's younger trees that are there to essentially take advantage of any falls in the canopy and be able to then take over the overstory. Now, this moving in the same watershed, just a bit away to an area that is closed to hunting, where you have about 20 to 50 deer per square mile, you see that where you lose that entire understory. And that's where you really have lost now a lot of the habitats for lots of wildlife. And this becomes a major issue when we're talking about biodiversity management for the long term, but also in terms of the real long-term forest management as well, because you're not going to have those young saplings that are able to then replace and regenerate the forest when the mature canopy trees fall. And then the long-term impact of this is generally going into fern forests. And these have become really common across the mid-Atlantic states, and now really coming into Northeast and into New England as the deer densities have continued to rise, because essentially the deer won't browse ferns unless really forced, and they end up taking over a lot of the understories. And if you go through a lot of the forests throughout Mass, including in and around Amherst, in areas where you have openings in the canopy now, many of those floors will now become proliferated by ferns, and that's predominantly due to the fact of overabundant deer in areas where there's not hunting access. Now, there are a bunch of other factors that come into play here as well, beyond just conservation management. So one major part is certainly with tick-borne illnesses. I'm not going to spend too much time focused on this, but this is something that certainly is a major priority in the Amherst community. Amherst is now the actual home to the New England Center of Excellence in Vector-Borne Diseases. We are a partner at Mass Wildlife, and I'm a co-PI with the other researchers, including the director, Steve Rich. We are working on a lot of research across the state on trying to address tick-borne illnesses, which is certainly, critical for our constituents and the communities in terms of human health, as well as, folks' pets and the like. And then there's also the direct human safety components as well. And this is data that comes from Mass DOT. And you can see Amherst is essentially in that channel running north-south, where you're starting to see some of the upticks in densities for deer collisions. And mind you, this is now already a couple years old, and deer densities have been rising in that region, as I'll talk about shortly. And long term, as deer densities start to mimic those in the east, we would very much expect that the deer collisions and the density of those collisions will go up. And so that's increasing both, the direct safety impacts, but also the cost to constituents, to vehicle risk, insurance, et cetera. Okay. Now, getting into the management side of this. First and foremost, we use a hunter-harvest based management model. And this is true in every single state in the country, with different tool sets that each state has beyond that. But every state uses it as the primary mode to address deer damage and manage their herd. It's certainly the most efficient method, as hunters are actually paying for the right to be able to hunt and be able to utilize a public resource. They then are, essentially accruing all those costs associated with hunting and their time, et cetera. And here in Massachusetts, we really are able to rely on the fact that it's had an incredible safety record. You are required to report any incidents that occur with hunting. And so with that, we can actually have long-term data sets on different kinds of accidents that happen across different kinds of game hunting. And 0 non-hunters have been killed by deer hunting in Massachusetts of any kind. And there have been no non-hunters even injured by any archery deer hunting in Massachusetts anywhere. And so this is where, there's a regular concern around the safety of hunting. That's certainly something I deal with a lot. I work with a lot of communities in and around Boston in particular, where that is a concern that comes up frequently. Some towns, it's actually the boards of health that actually manage the properties for hunting, such as Dover. And so I'm literally working with medical professionals in those communities. And the fact is, hunting really is quite safe, particularly urban hunting for deer. It's different depending on other game species, but certainly for deer hunting, it's a very safe activity, both because of the nature of the skills that hunters have to actually pick up. Hunters actually have to spend more time doing training than any other kind of licensed recreation in Massachusetts, compared to like fishing, et cetera. As well as also there's a direct incentive for hunters to be able to be hunting safe, because it helps proliferate the long-term recreation for hunting. Now, looking at trends across time, the deer harvest has continued to rise across the state. If you go back to the 1800s and even further back, Massachusetts, with colonization, was one of the first areas in the colonies that really saw deer almost go to extirpation here. And through conservation efforts, the population was able to rise. And then effectively, it got beyond the point of, being able to be fully sustainable in many areas of the landscape. And we've seen that the harvest numbers continue to rise with the deer population as well. Now, over time, we've also seen changes based on implements in the seasons as hunters have changed the kinds of implements they use. Shotgun hunting historically made up most of the harvest, and now that has been essentially flat for the last few decades. Whereas archery harvest is really where we've seen much of the growth in Massachusetts, and now we are a majority archery harvest, where 3 of the last 4 years we are over 50% harvest just from archery. And this is by seasons, this isn't by implement, but in terms of the actual harvest across all the seasons, because you can use archery equipment during any of the seasons, we across every season now we're at a majority archery harvest. Now, even with those growth that I just showed you in terms of the harvest, that is actually all in the context of declining hunters. So when you're seeing that linear growth and harvest, it's really exponential likely growth in much of the populations, because on a per hunter basis, we actually have a far higher harvest occurring. And we've had regular declines now going back to the 80s. And over the last since 2012, we also have a hunter survey where we can see what percentage of the hunters, licensed hunters, are actually active deer hunters. And even with that, we've seen substantial declines just since 2012. And so this is a key piece here, that every single deer hunter gaining access in the property becomes more and more important as we have a declining number of hunters. And certainly it increases the importance of being able to promote programs that can get hunters into those areas without putting up too many barriers. And separating the state, we really have 2 stories. The eastern portions of the state took a lot longer to recover in terms of the deer populations, as they were essentially limited to the southern Berkshires after all of the market hunting and such in the 17 and 1800s. And so it took a long time to see harvest really increase in the east. But eventually, as the actual number of deer in the east really exploded over the last 30, 40 years, we've now the east is where the majority of deer are being harvested. But if you look there over the last decade, even in zones 1 through 9, which makes up essentially western through central Mass, we're starting to see even that increase here over the last decade, which is concerning, particularly in light of the declining number of hunters, indicating, again, likely a growing population there. And you can look at this even more clear when you look at the adult male harvest per square mile. And that's because every hunter is limited to 2 buck tags, and that's been the case now for this entire period. It goes back to essentially the modern management of the population. And again, you really start to see that change now in zones 1 through 9 since 2015, where we've seen the population growing, even though the number of hunters that are taking those deer in zones 1 through 9 are actually declining. Now, to get at our actual population models, we use a number of different data sets, both from the regular reporting that hunters are required to do. So Massachusetts, every hunter has to report the deer that they harvest within 48 hours. And that makes up the bulk of the data set. And then each year we have a mandatory biological deer check week, the first week of shotgun, where we collect a lot of the age model information by having every single deer brought into our check stations. And we have about 50 biologists from the agency that are spread across the state that work during biological deer check week. And we actually check about 3,500 deer during that week. And we get things like the actual age of the deer, so we can build out the population via reconstruction model. We also can collect a lot of biological information on the deer to see what their health is. as well as doing a lot of disease sampling and things like tick sampling with NUVEC, for example. Then we use all that information to adjust our antlerless allocations. And that's really because, as I highlighted at the very beginning, female deer are able to have a lot of fawns. And so really they're the focus of population. One buck can inseminate many, many females. And so a single buck from a harvest standpoint, from a population standpoint, doesn't actually mean that much in terms of an actual population model. And so if you're trying to reduce growth in the population, you do that via antlerless harvest. And so each year we reevaluate based on the harvest and the population models, the allocations for antlerless permits, and then we essentially modify those allocations on a 3-year cycle based on what we're seeing for the individual zones. And then we manage the population itself in 15 wildlife management zones across the state. Now, this is really getting at where the densities are across the state, and then zooming into Amherst as well. So Amherst is in kind of a unique, I guess, neighborhood of towns there. It's at the joint location there between Zone 6, Zone 7, Zone 5, just on the other side of Amherst, and then also with 4 North and 4 South very close by as well. And this is a region that we're actually seeing the most change in quickly, really over the last 5 to 7 years or so. All of this, zones 1, 3, 4 North, and 7, were actually all within goal even 5 years ago. Zones 1 and 3 moved beyond goal in 2022 as the densities had risen, particularly from higher deer densities in adjacent areas in Connecticut, New York, and Vermont, but also with new access restrictions put in many of the communities that had seen social changes following COVID, with many new urban residents that had moved to the area and were no longer comfortable with hunting in those areas. And we've seen that subsequently now follow with 4 North moving beyond the goal range of beneath 18 deer per square mile in a year ago, and then now Zone 7 as well. And so really the region around Amherst is really starting to get into the area where the deer densities are becoming a problem. In these areas, I should back up, the areas actually within those tan sections are above 12 to 18 deer per square mile, which is our board mandated goal. And that's really because of the fact that above 18 deer per square mile, essentially forest regeneration stops. Even in the 15 to 18 deer per square mile range, you're already at a point where you're having major damage to the ecosystems, particularly with rare plants in those forests. But above 18, you don't get any of that mid-canopy growth with the seedlings growing up from that point. And so that's where it starts to become a significant problem for the ecosystems long term. And also kind of zooming in here on the trends. So these are those zones all right around Amherst. And you can see all of them are rising. They all kind of hit a bottoming point around 2012 or so, and now are growing either just beneath the top of that goal range or exceeding it there with Zone 7 and 4 North. And it is really important to keep in mind that these densities are actually essentially floors. And that's because we're only actually sampling from harvested deer. So those areas that are closed to hunting, which are not going to have that harvest-based mortality, are not even being sampled. And so those effectively would have even higher deer densities in those areas that are actually closed to hunting. And that's where, in some of these zones that may be marked as being within goal, in areas that are closed to hunting within those zones, they certainly can be well beyond that goal range. And that is a really key part that to keep in mind, that in areas that have been closed to hunting for decades, even if it's in a zone where there's extensive hunting around it, those densities can be well out of control. And this is a lot of info here, and I'm not going to nail down, but I really want you to see kind of the trends in information in harvest here for Amherst. Certainly in terms of the sex of deer, that it's been predominantly buck harvest across time in Amherst. However, we've seen that actually really level out here over the last 5 to 10 years with more does being taken. And the implement usage has sort of been interesting, where it was predominantly shotgun harvest, and then we saw bow and crossbow kind of pick up. This last year being a major exception to that, where there really was very little bow crossbow harvest, only 5 deer taken via archery equipment, and 26 being taken from shotgun. But you can really see where most of that came from if you look at the land type, where we saw a big drop there in terms of public land harvest in Amherst last year, and that being likely most of that archery harvest drop. But overall, we are seeing that harvest continue to rise in Amherst, as we'd expect in terms of the local deer densities going up. But that's also in that context, again, of declining number of hunters as well. Okay, now I'm going to talk a bit about really the other pieces here of deer management that are often not thought about. Deer really are a vital resource for the food system here in Massachusetts. More than 4 million meals actually come from venison each year for Massachusetts families. And so it's a really major part of the food system directly, but also the impacts when we talk about feeding other families beyond just the hunters themselves. And so in 2023, we conducted a really deep dive to understand both how our hunters are utilizing venison, but also to understand how much of this is actually going to non-hunters. And what we found is more than 1 in 4 successful hunters were actually giving away venison to other families, which is a huge part of hunting. That is a major part of the tradition of hunting, is being able to share that harvest with other members. The other thing is that we really wanted to understand how much food insecurity played a role even for our hunters as well. And we use the questions that directly come from the USDA household survey on food insecurity that goes out each week to understand how much, what percentage of our hunting population would actually classify as food insecure. And that ended up about 18% of our hunters about 11% of the hunters would be food insecure. And then about 18% were dependent on harvested game to supplement their limited food resources available. Now, all of this also was part of a broader initiative that we launched in 2022 to be able to create a new venue for successful hunters to be able to essentially harvest more deer. And once they've filled their own freezers and they filled their friends' freezers, and that's through our Hunters Share the Harvest program. And so through this program, which is directly developed with Mass Department of Public Health, hunters are able to donate their deer at one of our participating processors, where we pay the full cost of that processing. And then we even can allow partial donations, where we cover a portion of those processing costs if a portion of the deer is donated to the program. And all the venison with this is then ground, and then has a very strict reporting process. We have metadata on all of the venison, following all national food standards, and then is distributed to our partners that are growing across the state. And then now it even includes several community programs here, even around Amherst. So Amherst directly is receiving venison through the Food Bank of Western Mass. And we also are with partners, including the Northampton Survival Center as well, that has been, frankly, them in particular, they've been contacting us to kind of praise having access to the venison. One of the things with a lot of food banks is it's very hard to have access to proteins in particular. Fresh meat is very expensive to be able to provide for food banks. And so having access to this venison, is really a game changer for many of our partners. And in just 2.5 years, we've distributed more than 50,000 meals across Massachusetts. And this program is growing exponentially. We've went from 1 processor to 3 processors to 10 processors, and from 1 distributor to 5 distributors to now 16 distributors. So it is growing very rapidly, and it is a major part now when we talk about deer management for the long term, is how it really plays in with the food system here in Massachusetts. Now, I just want to highlight one quick case study here, just in terms of the impacts that changes to rules from conservation commissions can have. 2 seasons ago, Middleborough has had the highest deer harvest on the mainland now for at least 12 years, essentially going back to as long as we have data on a town by town basis for harvest. And that has a bunch of functions. Middleborough is in Eastern Mass, higher deer densities. It's a large town in general. In November 2023, they had hired a new recreation manager that was laying new trails and was concerned about hunting. Initially, they just completely shut down hunting. And then when they faced significant backlash, they paused that and then decided to spend all of 2024 kind of trying to develop new restrictions that could be implemented. And we worked closely with them on this. There was a lot of this that we had to kind of work through, kind of misinformation and misunderstandings as to some of the risks associated with it. And in the end, the actual final set of restrictions was actually pretty fair. I mean, they were pretty good. Like, we certainly would rather it be fully open without restriction, but there weren't any major final restrictions. But just the fact that it now created a environment where many hunters had felt like they were no longer welcomed, that saw a major impact in terms of the harvest this last season. And so the town ended up having a 26% drop in harvest compared to just a 6% drop in the entire rest of Zone 11. And that was almost certainly related directly to what had happened in terms of the Conservation Commission. And we work with conservation commissions all the time. Certainly every town has different social dynamics, different politics, everything that goes along with that. And there are many different ways these programs can look for hunting, whether it be a fully open type situation, like a town like Norwell, just south of Boston, where they choose to actually have it just wide open, or like a town like Town of Harvard that has a very managed program, which is very intensive to manage. And there's lots of programs in between, but it's just important to note that the changes on Conservation Commission land can have major impacts on the number of deer that are harvested and long term on the actual health of those properties that are within the Conservation Commission's responsibility. Okay, and with that, I can take any questions if you all have them for me.
Yeah, I have a quick comment, and maybe you have just a personal note. I've been treated for Lyme disease probably 13 times or more by now. So it's a big concern to my family. And when I get a tick bite, my family gets a bite, we've been sending the ticks, or actually just driving the ticks over to UMass to the program that you mentioned. I forget the name of it.
Yeah, tick report.
Tick report. Well, not sure if folks here are aware, but 45% of the ticks that they find in Amherst are found to have Lyme disease. And the major propagators of them, not exactly the vector, is deer. That's a huge thing. Second point I wanted to make, or actually I had a question. Did you say that the share of the harvest started in 2023?
2022. We started in December of 2022 with a pilot just after Thanksgiving. And yes, and then we had the full season 23 and full season 24.
Wow. So it's grown so quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. And this has had immense support. The team actually was awarded the highest public service award from the governor and lieutenant governor as well, a bit over a year ago as well for the program, because it's really changing the perspective of a lot of folks who've not been exposed to hunting, that it really is a vital portion of the food system.
Great program. Thank you. Any other questions? Dave?
Yeah, first off, I wanted to thank Martin. Your presentation was excellent. It covered a lot of ground, and we really appreciate you taking the time out to be with us tonight. And there's some members of the audience, and I just wanted to right out of the gate thank you. I'm hoping you'll be able to share your PowerPoint maybe with our conservation agent, Aaron Jock, who could post it as part of the packet for tonight's meeting. Maybe it's already there, I'm not sure. But that would be great, just so people could refer to it and we could refer back to it. So thank you so much. I had a couple of questions. One, I guess the first question was, you alluded to, you mostly talked about deer hunting in this, but you alluded to, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there may be types of hunting that pose greater risk than deer hunting. Could you say a little, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but that's kind of where I thought you were going with that. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because as you talked about some towns who have looked at the broad range of hunting, some towns have said, well, we'll allow this kind of hunting, but not this kind of hunting. And so I'm just curious, as we educate ourselves, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So as I highlighted, deer hunting in particular is overwhelmingly safe because of really the way it's hunted. It's a very specific targeted style of shooting. There are differences in safety depending on the kinds of hunting, and the riskier hunts, just in terms of overall number of incidents, are predominantly with bird hunting and bird sport hunting, turkey hunting and pheasant hunting in particular, where there are incidents. Now, mind you, those are still you'll have potentially one incident a year across tens of thousands of hunters with those styles of hunting. But those certainly, on a percentage basis and in totality, have a higher risk than deer hunting itself.
Okay. I had one other question, if I could, Andre, and that is, I think you mentioned that really the allowable take per hunter, and I could have heard this wrong, hasn't changed since 1985. So
Yeah.
is there consideration? I mean, why not simply allow hunters to take more deer where those populations are growing at a rate that is unhealthy for the broader ecosystem?
Yeah, let me clarify that. So that's just for the buck harvest. So the bucks has been capped at 2 because that doesn't change the population, because bucks effectively have no impact there. How we manipulate the population is via antlerless permits, and that's where we've actually been pretty dramatically increasing the number of antlerless permits. In the east, we've actually removed the cap altogether in zones 10 and 11, but even the number of surplus permits that are available in your region has gone up quite a bit. We've had surplus permits. Well, essentially, every hunter each year applies for an antlerless permit via our lottery system, and then we have set numbers of permits that are available in each zone. If the number of permits that we've set as an allocation in a zone exceeds the demand from the lottery, then we sell those via surplus permits, and hunters can have many of those for multiple zones. And Zone 7 has now had surplus permits for 3 years straight. And the other thing to keep in mind here, I didn't mention some of the other contacts that we've been working on in your area, but we are regularly now getting contacted by land managers in your region, including Mass Audubon for their Arcadia property, as well as with the water supply in Amherst, Northampton, and regions around there, because of the impacts on those water supply areas in particular, but also for land trust properties where they're seeing major issues. And we are actually working on additional permits that would be property specific for trying to even further the impact of deer management in those areas beyond just the allocations that we do across the entire zone.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, the buck. Yeah, I think I missed the buck and Antlerless.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Martin, I made the mistake of applying as my first choice Zone 7 this year, and then I noticed all the excess ones that were there. Yeah, and I realized this is new. So, Jason, question.
Yeah, thanks, Andre. Thank you, Martin, for coming here and attending tonight and presenting. I have a few questions, and one is, can you give us any information about the deer hunting in the town surrounding Amherst, as far as like, do they have more takes than we do? And then how does that potentially affect? I thought you mentioned a kind of a range in miles, but if we go either way, if something happens and we don't allow hunting here, does that then spread out like exponentially into the surrounding towns and surrounding areas, and then vice versa?
So I guess to your first question, I haven't done the profile that I did on Amherst for the other towns around. In general, we manage at the zone level. So I
Yeah.
really, the town data, I generally am only looking at when I'm doing a specific profile for something like this. I do know that Northampton in particular has started to see more restrictions. I know that's 2 towns over. But that's really the one that I've dealt with more recently because of the fact they're dealing with overabundant deer really picking up quite a bit in town there. But I'm not sure about the restrictions or the others around those. In terms of the deer densities, though, certainly that's portion of the state we're seeing densities rise quite a bit. Now, getting at the kind of impact across, I guess, the landscape with their home ranges and such like that. Amherst is really where you'd be kind of classifying it as a pretty suburban community in terms of the impact to deer, not necessarily in terms of a dense housing the way we might think of it compared to like a dense urban suburbia, but it certainly would be an area where deer home ranges would be quite a bit smaller. So you'd be looking at most does right in that between about 1/3 of a square mile to just over 1 square mile. And so if you restrict access to hunting on the few like open woodlots that are available, and people also don't have large enough private properties to be able to hunt on their own property in terms of the 500-foot setback, then effectively a lot of those deer then no longer are accessible by hunters. And so that's going to have, you've essentially taken away the possibility of that harvest mortality impacting any of those given deer. Now, the impact of that more broadly, though, doesn't stay on those woodlots because the fact each of those does, when they're producing more fawns, those fawns are going to disperse around. And so you're going to see more impact than just in those individual properties. You're going to see impact across the entire community. And as the populations grow regionally, all of that is really additive to the overall population.
Are things like you mentioned Northampton being 2 towns over, but I guess we have a good buffer in the Connecticut River there. So does that act as an effective buffer, or would they still find their way across that somehow?
Yeah, they swim far. They swim in the ocean, so that's
I
not
had
going to
no
slow them
idea.
down even a little bit. Yeah, so like we have at least every few days during the summer, they're swimming across the Elizabeth Islands and like back and forth to Martha's Vineyard. And deer are actually great swimmers. It's contradictory, it might seem, but the Connecticut River is substantially smaller than like the St. Lawrence, the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Yeah.
I did my PhD work in northern New York along the St. Lawrence Seaway, and I had deer that swim across and end up like my tag deer that end up in Ontario. So the Connecticut River is not going to be that much of a barrier there.
I had no idea they could swim.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jason.
Thank you.
Bruce, you had a question or? Okay, looks like Alex has it.
Yeah, I was curious. Thank you very much, Martin. I'll join and say we really appreciate you coming and making the time. I had a question about coyotes and the effect of coyotes on the population. And you do have a season on coyotes. So my question is two-part. What's the take of deer by coyotes? And if the reduce the coyote hunting season, would they have a larger impact on deer?
So in general, the actual predation and mortality that you get from coyotes kind of ends up as a limit. You end up with usually right around a 20 to 30% of the mortality with fawns from that. That was actually most of my work in New York was doing fawn survival, looking at like coyotes versus harvest, hunter harvest, vehicle collisions, etc. So that's a lot of the, I had the most urban and northeastern study that had been done on fawn survival yet, and really looked at a lot of these dynamics with coyotes. And we just, the coyote mortality itself doesn't end up overweighing a lot of just the reproductive output, particularly as the coyotes in general are going to be taking mostly unhealthy fawns or abandoned fawns. Deer naturally abandon fawns at a pretty high rate. It's particularly when does have two buck fawns, it is actually evolutionary advantageous for them to abandon one of those buck fawns, because if a doe puts all of her milk and energy into raising a single buck fawn, to the faster that buck can grow up, the faster he can then pass on his genes. And so with that, most of the coyote mortalities of fawns end up first with those abandonments that happen early on after birth. The other thing is that when you look at the actual seasonal change in terms of mortalities from coyotes with deer, it essentially hits its peak in July and then completely collapses by September. And then there's almost no mortalities from coyotes the rest of their life. So essentially, if a fawn makes it to September, it's essentially completely fine. There are some mortalities that happen when you have certain kinds of weather events. Good example is that this year with the ice that we've had, with conditions like this, we do see some adult mortalities of deer from coyotes, because you'll have the coyotes be able to run on top of the ice and be able to, and deer break through, but it doesn't have a population level impact. You're usually looking at about 1 or 2% adult harvest, adult predation mortality. In terms of the changes to a coyote season, that would likely have almost no impact, because it's predominantly compensatory mortality, where if a fawn didn't die from being predated by a coyote, it would die from the other health impacts that already weakened it, or from being abandoned in the first place.
So just to sum, the biggest impact of the coyotes is on fawns, and you said that about 23% of fawns go to coyotes?
Yeah, I mean, that varies a lot. So that's very site specific, but the actual the fawn survival piece doesn't change that much. All that's changing is whether they're dying from coyotes, or if they'd be dying from natural conditions, or they'd be dying from abandonment. It's one of the hardest parts of doing fawn survival work, is actually being able to parse out, did the fawn actually die of an abandonment, or did it actually die of a predation? And the only way to do that is to track the fawns very, very closely. So fawn survival projects nowadays, you are tracking the fawns every 4 to 6 hours to be able to make sure that you're able to parse apart those differences to catch an abandonment before it actually is predated.
Thanks. I wonder if you could, if I could just ask him to clarify something, Andre?
Yeah, sure. And after that,
We're talking about home ranges, and our conservation lands aren't all that big. And I assume that a deer wanders in and out of them. You know, a deer may go from parts of Amherst up into Pelham. So if we had a zone of depression by killing deer, I assume that deer in a more dense area would move in. Is that true?
To some extent. So there's a lot of very specific population dynamic pieces that come into play with this. But certainly areas that become devoid of deer are going to have a natural flow from high density areas to lower density areas. The dynamics get a little bit more complicated because of the fact they have social dynamics within their populations. And so there's a whole thing called the Porter's rosebud hypothesis, which is effectively that You have matrilineal groups within the females. The oldest matriarch is going to make up the center of the rosebud, and then each of her future daughters and their daughters' daughters make up the petals of the rosebud. And so they will fill a given area because they're defending effectively a territory from another set of matrilineal families. And so it doesn't exactly work in a one-to-one where if they're going to automatically go from high density to low density, because there's differences in terms of the resources is in a given area. There's differences in terms of those social dynamics. But in general, if you're going to have an area where you have lower densities, you're going to very quickly have rivals from other areas.
Yeah. My property up in New Hampshire, when I put out my game cameras, I can recognize some of the deer. One's got a big chunk out of her ear, and there's signs that I can recognize does in particular. And I see the same group of 3 or 4 deer, dull does, two mature does, you know, and then younger animals. I see them in my camera almost daily. They just they don't seem to wander very far, and maybe that's a sign that the property is pretty healthy. But anyway, thank you very much for coming.
All right. I think we're gonna have to limit the questions to Jason and Bruce, whose hands are up, and then I would like to take some questions and so on from the public who's or the guests who are watching and listening. Jason, go ahead.
So you mentioned shotgun, bow, arrow, crossbow, and primitive. Is there rifle hunting for deer?
No, Massachusetts statutorily it doesn't allow rifle hunting for deer. So that's something that unless there was a change by an act of the legislature and the governor, we cannot allow rifle hunting. And so it's restricted to well, there's some nuance there, but effectively underneath the statute, there's no rifle hunting of deer.
Okay, and this I know this is not necessarily your wheelhouse, but is that is that why we have a good safety record in Massachusetts, or one of the reasons? And then could you explain like just deer hunting season? Like, is it just people walking around in the conservation area with, you know, shooting shotguns and bows and arrows, and then me walking my dog with my kids? Like, how does that? I have no idea how hunting works, and I got to assume that there's a lot of other people like me, certainly in the last 4 years, that have moved to town and don't even know that you can hunt on conservation land, or would be very, very surprised to find out. So could you just, again, I know that's not necessarily your wheelhouse, but could you just give us a quick rundown of that?
Yeah, so to your first question about the rifle, hunting really is safe everywhere across the country. If you look at the national statistics, there aren't that many actual incidents per number of hunters. The biggest thing that you drop with the change in terms of rifle is just the ability of having a shot that goes further. But overall, it is that's not the primary piece here. It's more has to do with just the nature of hunting here in Massachusetts. The other thing to keep in mind, if you're utilizing a rifle in Massachusetts, let's say you were bear hunting where you can use a rifle, we don't have long sight lines here in Massachusetts. We don't have large open fields like prairie states where you're shooting something that's 1.5 miles off. If you're going to be shooting something with a rifle, generally most places, you know, you're only having a single field or break in the forest. And so you're almost always going to be shooting on a downward angle anyways. And so with that being the case, we don't have a landscape where the risks associated with it can really apply. So it more has to do with that than the implement restriction. Now, it's a great question, actually, in terms of what that looks like in terms of hunting. If you haven't been a part of it, it's hard to actually imagine in that regard. Archery hunting is predominantly from tree stands. So certainly, you know, above 90, probably 95% of archery taken deer are coming from tree stands. Or from, now folks also do what's called saddle hunting, where you essentially are in kind of a rock climbing gear and hanging off a tree. It allows more movement. And with that, that makes it even more safe because you're shooting at a downward angle. If you're archery hunting from a tree stand, if you're shotgun hunting from a tree stand, all of that we're having a direct downward angle. Archery hunting, most of the time you're only taking a shot right in the about 20 to 25 yard range is about the max that people are taking shots. A really long archery shot is in like the 30 to 40 yard range. So these are not long distance pieces, which is why, having, large setbacks really is not necessary for archery, because you're never taking a shot very far. You're staying very close to wherever you're taking that shot from. If you are on the ground, you might be in a ground blind. That's kind of the other option there if you're going to be in archery, because in archery, you need that deer to come in really close to be able to take a shot. With shotgun hunting, it varies a little bit. You may be in a tree stand, you may be in a ground blind, just because you have the longer safe shot. But generally, you're still going to be looking, a max shot for most modern shotguns is only about 50 to 75 yards. 100-yard shot is really starting to push it for a shotgun. And so you're not really taking long distance shots either in that case. The other, in terms of like actually going through a forest, you might be doing a deer drive type situation with other hunters. And that'd be the one time you might be kind of going through. The other thing that you may hear is people who stalk. And so if you're stalking through the woods, that's going to be if you think that you might catch deer, or oftentimes if you've sat the tree stand in the morning, nothing has come by in that early morning, you might go stalking for an hour on your way out to see if you happen to get a deer on the way out from the tree stand. But that's a much smaller percentage of harvest, just because you're going to make more noise as you're going through the forest as well. And muzzleloader hunting kind of is a mix of the two. With muzzleloader hunting, you're using you have to actually plan a lot more ahead with it. You have to be prepared for the fact that muzzleloaders, you do have black powder that can get wet. I mean, everything around it, it's a little bit more complex with muzzleloaders. And so still a lot of those are going to be from stands or from ground blind. Some folks may be stalking, but that's the lowest impact in terms of the number of bucks afield, and the intensity of that harvest is certainly the lowest of the 3 seasons. But does that make sense in terms of what you'd actually see in the woods?
Yeah, and I just I know people who hunt, but like I said, I've never participated in it. So the notion that like I'm gonna be walking through the woods with my kids and my dog, and have a errant arrow fly by, or
Yeah.
slug is not, it's still something that is a little concerning, but hearing about how it's done and shooting down at the angle, it's much more comforting. And I guess it happens a lot more in the morning. Everybody I know that hunts goes out like super early in the morning.
Yeah, so I mean, when you're going to be most successful is going to be right at dawn or right at dusk. And ultimately, the reason why you don't have incidences like that is because if you're out there walking your dog, there's not going to be a deer running through there. So the risk of when people are actually out recreating, hunters aren't going to set up where they think a lot of people are going to be recreating.
Yeah.
Because of that. So the other thing is hunters are very attuned. Like, I guess the piece of this I didn't talk about is really the scouting side of it. The successful hunters do all of that work before the season. They learn where there's a lot of human activity. They learn where there's a lot of deer activity, and you're usually trying to make it where you are set up right over where the deer's going to be. I mean, like, you are going right on those deer trails. And so it's not the idea that hunters don't just like randomly go into the woods. There's a lot of very particular skill that goes into that side of it. Because of that, there really aren't those risks, and you're not, I honestly don't think I could ever recall a situation where there's been something like that with someone recreating and then like an arrow going through. That's just not something that's going to occur, because particularly with archery hunting, you have to get that deer in so close. You're not going to be like, you can see what's in front of you at 30 yards. I mean, that's very, very close when you're up in a tree stand. You're not going to be, mistaking a target with something like that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's very helpful, informative.
Jason, just to add a little bit to that, the deer hunter is not going to want to make any noise whatsoever. They're not going to want to release an arrow or take a shot at anything they're not going to kill. So you're not going to have a lot of arrows or bullets flying around. You're not going to be hearing a lot of shots that aren't directed right at a deer, so to speak. I mean, the other thing is, as a walker or a hiker, you're going to be making a bunch of noise. The deer hunter doesn't want that. The deer hunter's not going to be making the noise. So they'll hear you. Usually they're still. I mean, when you're moving, you can't hear well. If you're still, that's when you hear. So that's what the hunters are going to be doing. They're going to be stopping as much, they're going to move for a few steps, wait a bit, move a few steps, wait a bit. Yeah, anyway, and I'll tell you, I have a shotgun that's a rifle barrel, and uses a 20 gauge shell. And just to explain what that does is it reaches further and it reaches more accurately. And I won't shoot something that's any more than, let's say, 70, 80 yards. And that's once I was able to actually peg something at that distance. So it's not, they're always meaning a target. They're a lot closer, like Martin was saying. Alex, one last question, and then
Yeah, real quick.
we should go to
Is
the-
Martin, when you were doing your analysis for Amherst, and you had a chart up there, can you refresh my memory on how many hunters we have living in Amherst, or more importantly, how many deer were taken in Amherst?
Yeah, I can't tell you the first because that's a totally different.
Yeah, not that
That's not
important.
data we track that way. But
Not
in
that
terms of the
important.
harvest, this last season was 35. The year before was at 40. And if you look over the preceding 5 years, it was between 25 and 29 each year. So the last 2 years are record highs for Amherst. Even longer term back than that, I looked at the.
So given our area and the density that you go for, what's our deer population?
That's a pretty complex answer.
Just
Without,
give me a number.
I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. There's a lot that goes into that, and with that, you can have such big differences within a community. And again, our models are entirely based on the harvest, the opens area, the
The
areas that
zone.
are open to hunting. And
So if I just took the non-residential area of Amherst and took a low density, it's I haven't done the math, but that's a lot of deer. And I wonder what, taking 35 deer out of there really does to the population.
I mean, ultimately, with a lot of this stuff, what I regularly tell folks is when we're talking about overabundant deer, the best correlate you can really use is when we're talking about climate change, about trying to bend the curve. In Eastern Mass, where I can't, no matter what we would do, we're not going to necessarily be able to pull back the population, but what we can do is try to lower that curve. It is about having each one of those deer harvests reducing how bad it's going to get. Each one of those does that are being harvested last year, 18 does. Now those 18 does that would potentially produce 36 or more fawns this coming season. Now they don't have that potential to do so. And so that's where that impact is. So it's not just about the individual impact. It's that long-term exponential piece of that in terms of the reproduction. But it's not necessarily always about having the one individual deer. This is also not their only cause of mortality. Amherst has a lot of vehicle collisions with deer. That's another piece of the mortality for adults. There's also going to be those rare ones with coyotes. There's going to be some that are going to die of disease. There's, each of those things. So this is all additive mortality. And each of those harvests does matter when you look at this in an additive.
I was just interested in the number of deer. I didn't mean to go on. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Aaron, can you bring in anyone from the public who might have questions? And Bruce, I can.
No, that was my hope, is to move to the public comment.
Thank you. You put down your hand, Alex, if you don't mind. Thanks. Alex, your hand is raised.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't see any members of the public with their hand raised, Andre.
All right, if there's anyone in the public, if you can raise your hand, how do they do it if they're on the phone?
Let me just do a quick look. Um,
I think I'm seeing most of the folks in attendance are waiting for the hearings.
okay. Yeah, I don't see on a quick Google search how to do it.
Mhm.
Star nine.
If you're on a phone and you want to make a comment or ask a question, you can hit *9. We're gonna wait a few seconds here, and if not, I think we'll move on to the
I'll say,
hearings.
Aaron, I'll send the copy of the PowerPoint over to you so that way you have that for you guys to post with that.
Thank you very much.
Martin,
And for all your work, we really appreciate it.
your presentation, Martin, has been outstanding with a lot of good information. Thank you so much for taking the time to present us with some numbers that we can digest, and with some facts that we can also take into account. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me. And if
Hey,
in the
Aaron.
future you guys have any more, questions of this, or if there's discussions about, what kinds of restrictions or those kinds of things, we certainly are always here as a resource that can be brought in to help out with any of those discussions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Well, with that, then we're going to move to our hearings. We have 3 hearings tonight. First, we're going to go through some general procedures for these hearings. Each hearing is going to be 20 minutes in the agenda, 5 minutes for staff comments, 5 minutes for presentation by the applicants or representatives, 5 for the public, and 5 for conservation commissioners. Just so that we all are aware, any submitted materials or materials that are revised have to be submitted by Wednesday the week prior to the meeting at close of business. Please state your name, address of your project, and pronouns for the public. And as far as the Roberts Rules of Orders, you should be on mute unless you're talking, and raise your hand if you don't have the floor, and I or the chairperson will facilitate those communications. With that, we'll move to our hearings. The first hearing number 1. This hearing is being held as required by the provisions of Chapter 131, Section 40 of the General Laws of the Commonwealth on an act relative to the protection of wetlands as most recently amended, and Article 3.31, wetlands protection under the Town of Amherst General Bylaws. This is a notice of intent, Wendell Wetland Services on behalf of Marie Hess and David Todd for the replacement of an existing retaining wall immediately adjacent to bordering vegetated wetlands at 31 Blossom Lane. Aaron, if you wouldn't mind kicking off your comments.
Sure. Sorry. So I put the site visit photos in the folder. I can share those if anybody wants me to. I did meet on site with Ward Smith, the consultant, the owners, and the contractor that's proposing to do the work, and reviewed the proposed BMPs for the project. The project is replacement of an existing timber retaining wall, which is very close to a wetland boundary. The wall is deteriorating and basically failing at this point, so it needs replacement. I was satisfied with the BMPs that they're proposing. I did have some, recommendations, and I have drafted an order of conditions. And so I think just generally it's a very simple project. They're proposing to do, so my recommendation was that they do a silt fence, mostly as sort of a visual and physical barrier, rather than trenching it in because it's actually in the wetland. I recommended that they just put the fence in and fold it, and put a compost sock over the folded edge, towards the work area so that it will and stake at a closer interval so that it will hold it down and provide a visual barrier. They need, I think, about 6 feet between the retaining wall and the fence. And so they're going to put down some plywood or some rubber matting. It's going to be human foot traffic at that area and between the wall and the wetland. The area above is going to have an excavator, and they have a stockpile area identified. So I can share any of the plans, but I don't want to take up the whole time. So I'll pull Ward Smith in, and if there's anybody else who is here who wants to join the panel, just raise your hand and I'll pull you in.
Hello.
Welcome, Ward.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's one of those houses that was built, I think, in the 70s. And they put the retaining wall, the wetland boundary extends right up to the retaining wall, essentially. So there's skunk cabbage and jewelweed right up to the retaining wall. So no machinery will be in the wetland, but they have to have foot traffic in there. And that's why, as Erin said, we're going to use the contractor talked about using plywood because he thought it was cheaper. So no trees will be cut by the project. The whole intention is to remove the existing timbers and take them off the site and dispose of them legally, to pull all the soil out of there and stockpile it in next to the road, be encircled by erosion control there as well. And then to replace the timber cribbing, retaining wall in exactly the same location, and to put a perforated pipe at the bottom of the wall and some stone, and then to backfill with the soils that were removed initially, and all the existing any excess soils will be removed from the property. So yeah. So it's about 350 square feet of temporary wetland impact for the plywood where people will be walking right there. So the contractor's talking about doing this when it's dry. And I think it's not a huge concern, but there's skunk cabbage down there. And I'm thinking of all the skunk cabbage getting squashed, but he's talking about doing it when it's dry. So if the commission wants to add a condition that the work would be done in July or later, I think that would be good. But once the skunk cabbage has gotten all of the sunlight it needs and all the energy it needs, it'll come back next year fine if it's not squashed in the spring. He doesn't want to work in the spring anyway because it's going to be too wet. So I think that's reasonable. And then we're proposing to sow that area with 1 pound of a New England wetland seed mixture, just to get some more wetland vegetation there. You can see to the right there, that's where the access will be down from the soil stockpile area. It's an existing lawn, so that will be just reseeded with lawn. And as Erin talked to the contractor, the sediment erosion control will remain in place until that's well established, as she said, when it needs to be mowed.
All right. Is that it?
Yeah.
All right. It's what, 79 feet or something, I think I saw earlier today, 79 feet of wall, or how much, what's the length of the,
Didn't measure it out exactly, but that's about what it is. Yeah.
and it's essentially it's right below the house. I mean, it's
Yes. Yeah.
no-
There's really no, there it is.
okay, yeah,
So
I
there
drove by.
you can see my flags right there, right at the bottom of the wall. So there's really not much of a yard in the back. You know, there's the house, and then they've got a couple of garden beds in there, and that's it.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Ward. Is there anybody from the public who has questions or comments on this? I'm not seeing any hands up right now. If you do have a question or comment, you can put your hand up, or if you're on the phone, you can hit *9. All right, commissioners, if you have any questions, frankly, I see this as being pretty straightforward, but any questions, please raise your hand. All right, with that then, if we want to have a motion, Aaron's just put that up.
Yeah, I will move to close the public hearing and issue order of conditions for 31 Blossom Lane, DEP number 089-0749, with standard boilerplate conditions under both the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and Wetlands Protection Town of Amherst General Bylaws, Article 3.31 and regulations, as well as special conditions.
Let me just stop for a second. Did you guys want to make a condition that it be in July or beyond? I think I would.
I will add
agree.
I'll add to my motion to include a special condition that the work be done in July or beyond when it is not wet.
Alex, are you doing a second, or do you have a discussion you want to pursue? We can't hear you.
I just wanted to ask Ward if, I think of August as being the driest month. Is that drier than July?
Depends on the year. My concern was, I think requiring it to be dry is the important thing. My thought was July is late enough for the skunk cabbage to get enough energy from the sun, so that even if they get squashed, which they will, it won't affect them. They'll be able to grow the next spring. So I feel comfortable with July or later, provided that conditions are dry. I mean, something like to that effect.
Thank you.
I'll second with the addition.
All right, Bruce, Jason with a motion, Bruce with a second. Bruce,
Aye.
Jason,
I
Rachel,
Aye.
Alex?
Aye.
No. Thank you very much, Ward. We'll see you in a few minutes, I think. Are you here for the next one?
Yes.
Okay. Hearing number 2 is a notice of intent, Wendell Wetland Services on behalf of Pham Thao for the construction of a single-family home driveway and septic system within the buffer zone to bordering wetland, vegetated wetlands at Old Montague Road. I didn't see an actual address there. What number is it there?
I don't think it has an address assigned by the building inspector yet. It's just identified as 0 Montague Road. And it does have a map and lot, which is 2A36. And there is a note which is a little outdated about the continuance. I wasn't sure if Ward would be coming tonight or if we were doing a written continuation. So anyway, that's where we're at. We did receive a revision, but I know, having a conversation with Ward, I think there's some additional edits that might be happening. So
Yes.
I think
And we're asking for a continuance just because of the Aaron hasn't had a chance to look at the wetland boundary given the snow conditions.
It makes a lot of sense. Ward.
Once we'll have snow in July, it may take a while.
Yeah. Well, with that, we're looking for a motion then.
I move to continue the public hearing for Is it 0 Old Montague Road on to March 12, 2025 at 7:40 PM.
I second that.
All right, Alex with the motion, Jason with a second. Jason,
Aye.
Alex,
Aye.
Rachel,
Aye.
Bruce,
Aye.
and I'm an aye. Well, with that, thanks again, Ward.
Thank you.
You have a good one. Hearing number 3. This hearing is being held as required by the provisions of Chapter 131, Section 40 of the General Laws of the Commonwealth, an act relative to the protection of wetlands as most recently amended, and Article 3.31, Wetlands Protection under the Town of Amherst General Bylaws. This is a request for determination, an RDA, by Dave Zomack on behalf of the Town of Amherst to determine whether work to mow or brush hog a pedestrian path from the parking lot area at Vista Terrace to the trolley line, map 25B, lot 74, is subject to the Wetlands Protection Act and the Wetlands Protection Town of Amherst General Bylaws. With that, Aaron or Dave?
Thanks, Andre. I'm going to present this because Aaron has a conflict of interest. So, Aaron, if you could share the image, would that be possible? The map?
Yes, just give me 1 second.
Sure. While Aaron is doing that, we did do a site visit out there today from 11 to about noon or so. Andre and Rachel joined me. This is about a 7-acre piece of property that was gifted to the town essentially to make this trail connection. It was part of a about a 7-home subdivision that was developed a few years ago. And we work with the developer because it creates a unique opportunity. It created a unique opportunity for us to add some access to our property, which is adjacent to the Kestrel Trust property over on the Plumbrook Pond, and it adding a small parking area, which you see in the upper left-hand corner in gray, to the what formerly was subdivision open space. It's now conservation land, permanently protected. It allows us to add about a 5-car parking lot there and provide access both for the residents, but also for visitors to park there and enjoy pretty easy access to the Mount Holyoke Range State Park and our trails, of course. What we are proposing is this was all part of a small farm. It was about 15 acres prior to the subdivision. And the yellow track that you see coming off the parking lot from the upper left-hand corner, going over a stream with an existing culvert, that is the old farm road. We're essentially reactivating the old farm road. It has grown up, and Rachel and Andre, I think, can attest to our foray through the invasives that are now taking over that farm road. It's not particularly thick, but there's a lot of multiflora rose in particular that has come in that old farm road. And we're simply proposing to mow a 6-foot path from the parking lot over the existing culvert, and then make our way east, southeast on the yellow line to connect with the trolley line trail that'll take people up to the Mount Holyoke Range. So it's really the only impact of this project that is in a resource area would be basically cutting through the invasives and creating a 6-foot wide path. There are no other improvements proposed in the resource area. There will be, the parking lot is already existing, and we'll do some modest improvement there with a split rail fence, kiosk, and some signage. This project would be done sometime in the drier summer months. I don't have an exact timeline on that. And I think I'll stop there. If Andre or Rachel, who were out on the site visit, happy to have you add any comments.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, just a quick note on the culvert. I typically picture a culvert being a pretty narrow narrow passage to get over or get over a stream. This is about a 10-foot wide ridge almost with that big culvert inside underneath it.
We did take some pictures. Aaron may be able to share those.
Great. That'd be good to see.
I actually wasn't able to download them, Dave.
Okay.
I apologize. I just ran out of time at the end of the day.
No worries.
And essentially, once you leave the field in that picture, you end up running into just a whole bunch of multiflora rows. Well, a whole bunch, just enough to get you caught up. And what is it? Bittersweet, and so on. It's a pretty straightforward project, if you would. What do you think, Rachel?
Yeah, I agree. I think the only other pieces that I was just noticing that it actually provided much easier point of access for someone who's mobilely challenged. I'm currently nursing a hurt foot, and it just the fact that it's level terrain, leaving that parking area and be very gently sloping into the Kestrel Pond area and those trails, which are generally kind of flat, whereas Sweet Alice has kind of a steep drop down to the brook and can be a little harder for people who are mobilely challenged. So it's nice. I think this will make Sweet Alice even more accessible to those who are, who are limited in their ability to move.
Ooh, thank you. And I don't know if any of you remember that when that parcel was donated and we moved to accept that, right? It was donated what, about a year and a half ago or so?
Probably 2 years ago.
Years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, time flies.
Just a reminder too, Rachel referred to the pond as the Kestrel Pond, and it kind of is affectionately, but that pond is owned and managed by the Conservation Department and under your care, custody, and control, the entire pond, with the exception of the eastern, a small portion of the eastern shore. But this is all part of that kind of one of the final phases, as Rachel said, to provide a little bit easier access from the west, with our goal to someday connect it to Atkins so that people could safely walk or hike from Atkins over across 116. We will need a crosswalk there at some point to allow people to park there, say, get something to eat, and then maybe hike over across Vista Way, where we have a right to pass and repass an easement, and get up on the Mount Holyoke Range and come back. So small parking lot, and we will work with the neighbors on Vista Terrace. They've been very involved. I've kept them up to date, and we will meet with them before any of this work happens sometime this summer.
Great, thanks, Dave. Now, is there anybody from the public? I see one attendee still left here. If you have any comments or questions, if you don't mind raising your hand, and you'll be brought into the conversation. If you're on a phone, you can just hit *9 and that'll notify us as well. I don't see any hands up from the public. Any questions from fellow commissioners or comments? None. With that, Aaron, if you don't mind putting up the motion. If not, I can, let's see if we can.
Here we go.
You got it coming?
I'll move to close the public hearing and issue a determination of applicability for map 25B lot 74, finding a positive determination under the town of Amherst general bylaw wetlands protection, checking box 5, and negative determination under the Wetlands Protection Act, checking box 3.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Jason with the motion, Rachel with a second. Rachel?
Aye.
Jason,
Aye.
Bruce,
Aye.
Alex? Didn't hear you, Alex.
Sorry, I keep obeying the rules to be on mute.
That's good.
Aye.
And I'm an aye. All right.
Thank you very much. Just one final note, Andre, we will be naming this trail after a longtime staff member, Jonathan Tucker, retired as our planning director some years ago. And he grew up in South Amherst and was instrumental in our master plan, open space and recreation plan, many open space projects through his long career with the town. So when we have a ribbon cutting dedication, of course, the commission will be there, and you'll all be invited, and we'll have a celebration at some point when the trail and parking is all completed.
Excellent. A few years down the road, we might have a Zomac trail too. No.
We're hopeful.
Okay. Thanks, David. Next up, monitoring reports. I saw there were a bunch of monitoring reports. I read through a few. Anything to?
No, not really. I did relay the comment about the gate that Alex brought up last week, or last meeting. And I relayed that to the Pure Sky team at Hickory to try to prioritize getting that repaired. We did at the beginning of the meeting skip over the land use applications, so I just want to make sure we don't forget about those, but I don't really have anything else notable on monitoring reports.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for reminding me of that. Okay. We do have 6 land use applications. They're all by the same. Well, I'll let Aaron.
Hold on, Andre,
Alex.
I got to step away for a minute. I'll be back very shortly.
All right. Thanks. Aaron, if you don't mind giving us a quick rundown on the land use applications.
Sure. So the series of land use applications that came in were submitted by the Hitchcock Center, and they're for these Little Bear Walks, which are this little walk that they're putting together at multiple different conservation areas where they give small children, I want to say they're under 3 or under 4, a little backpack that's like a little bear backpack, and they put different tools in there that the kids can use on the nature walk, like, little binoculars and looking glass and stuff like that. And so it's sort of like a guided nature hike for small children. I don't personally have any concerns about it. So yeah, that's just a quick update.
There, so it's 6 permits in 6 different locations. They have the dates for when they're going to be using them, and it seems that each permit has 2 dates, up to 2 dates, that they may be going there. Bruce, got a question?
Aaron, I looked in vain in the folder for a picture of the backpack.
Oh, aw. I can send a picture around if you're interested in
I
seeing them.
gotta see the picture.
They're
I mean,
posted
I'm
on,
over this, but
if
come
you
on.
follow the Hitchcock Center on Facebook, they've posted a couple adorable photos of little backpacks if you wish
All
to
right,
see
well, I
them.
don't, so maybe you could send one around.
Okay.
Sorry, I can't stop smiling.
It is pretty sweet. I mean, it's kind of like, as good as it gets in terms of activities on conservation land.
I think they're saying maximum of around 20. I think that between the children, educators, and parents. Do we need a? Is there any? Well, let's start with the public. Is there anyone out of the public who has anything to say about this? I don't see any attendees. So I guess not. Any questions regarding this from our commissioners?
Can we vote on all these at once?
That's what I would propose, yes.
Thank you.
All right, well, if we're good to vote, we don't need a motion, right?
I think a motion approving all of them.
I'm good. I move that we approve the land use permit CLU 25-5 through CLU 25-10. And there are 6 of them.
I second that.
Excellent. Bruce with a motion and Jason with a second. Jason?
Aye.
Bruce? Rachel?
Aye.
Alex is not in attendance right now, and I'm an aye.
We have a quorum. Thank you.
Right. Well, if unless there's anything else that if there's anyone in the public who wants to comment, I see no attendees. And are there any other topics that folks would like to cover that were not anticipated? I believe not. We're looking for a motion to.
I move we adjourn.
I second.
All right, Bruce with the motion, Rachel with a second.
Rachel on this. Yeah, there we go.
Rachel,
Aye.
Bruce,
Aye.
Jason.
Aye.
And I'm trying to figure out whether I want to, no, yes, I'm an aye as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everybody.
You have a good
Good night.
All right.
Good
Have a
night.
good night, guys.